Hello and welcome to the most excellent 80s movies podcast. It's the podcast where a filmmaker, a comedian, and their very ethical guests are ready to believe you as we bust our way through the 80s movies we think we love or might have missed with these our modern grown-up eyes to see how they hold up. And today we're talking about Ghostbusters, a movie selection from 1984 about which Google says, after the members of a team of scientists, played by Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, and Bill Murray, lose their cushy positions at a university in New York City, they decide to become Ghostbusters to wage a high-tech battle with the supernatural for money. They stumble upon a gateway to another dimension, a doorway that will release evil upon the city. The Ghostbusters must now save New York from complete destruction. I'm Krissy Lenz, one of the directors at the Neighborhood Comedy Theater in downtown Mesa, Arizona. And with me, as always, is
Nathan Blackwell, independent filmmaker.
Independent filmmaker extraordinaire. Maker of independent films.
Which means I don't get paid to do it.
Right. And with us today is a returning guest, one of our favorites. It's the Ethical Panda himself, Matthew Fox. Hello, Matthew.
Hey.
Glad to be back.
Super glad to have you. Before we jump in, tell our listeners a little bit about all the different Star Wars and superhero ethics podcasts they can hear you on.
Sure. So I run two podcasts. One is called Superhero Ethics, and that's where we just kind of take ethical questions, interesting moral questions that come from, it started out specifically about superheroes, branched into science fiction, branched into fantasy, branched into martial arts and chess, and now it's just about pretty much anything that geeks would enjoy that would start some interesting questions. So it's everything from Team Tony versus Team Cap to what are the ethics of the Force to why are certain people cast in certain things and how is violence portrayed and stuff like that. And if it sounds very dry, we do have a lot of fun with it. But if you like a little bit of philosophy in your bad B movies, this is the podcast for you. The other podcast we do is called Star Wars Generations, which is primarily me, a rather elderly person, talking to two people in their early 20s as they try to make me feel very old. Mostly, though, it's really great for all of us to talk about Star Wars and realize how different. I think there's so much generational conflict around a lot of these properties. It's a lot of fun for us to watch it and, me be able to say, like, as someone who experienced these movies first, here's how I see these things. And, for me, I've learned a lot more about why they enjoy some of the things that aren't my favorite because of how they experience them in different ways. And there we talk about all kind of Star Wars things. We're doing episode by episode coverage of The Bad Batch right now. We're going to be doing The Acolyte. We do bonus content, great things like that. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. And you can find all of that on the True Story FM family of podcasts, which I know you guys are also part of, or just by searching for theethicalpanda.com.
That is wonderful. I love all of those ideas and things. I love intergenerational. That's one of the things I love most that we talk about, our 80s movies is which ones really are intergenerational and span the test of time, about which Ghostbusters is certainly one. My kids still love and cherish Ghostbusters. They both 18-year-old and 13-year-old both watched with me when we watched it together for this podcast and loved it. My son was obsessed with this movie when he was turning 4. We had a Ghostbusters birthday party for him, where we watched the movie. We made little build-your-own Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans, and we had the Arizona Ghostbusters come and do like a little birthday dance for him. So this movie it might be bad parenting to show this movie to a kid who's that age and have them become obsessed with it. But this movie is a family favorite and was a favorite of mine growing up too as a kid. What about for you, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those, like, there's a couple of like those movies that you grow up, it's like, okay, what's this birthday going to be themed? And Ghostbusters was always an option. I remember the Ghostbusters cartoon. I remember the Ghostbusters video games. I remember the Ghostbusters toys. And yeah, it was definitely a part of my early imaginative life.
What about for you, Matthew? What was your experience with Ghostbusters?
Yeah, I was just about the right age. I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old when this movie came out. I became absolutely obsessed with it. I was a Ghostbuster for Halloween that year or the next year with my little,
Yay.
store-bought, like, black backpack and great light brown suit. I probably ran around the house saying "Bustin' makes me feel good" far more than a 7-year-old. Though I will have a question later about it. 'Cause I don't know if that phrase meant what we think of it meaning today back then. But yeah, it has been one of my favorites. I've watched a lot of the recent ones, and it's one where, as I think we'll have some conversations about, there are parts of it that I think have aged very well and still really hold up. There are some parts that are, "Oh, yep, that was the '80s. That was a completely different time." So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's still one I love and cherish. Um, I think if, like, I saw it for the first time today as an adult, I don't know if I'd feel the same way about it, but
Mm.
definitely one of my favorites still.
Interesting. Well, that is definitely something we want to talk about, is how you would feel about it if you saw it for the first time with your grown-up adult eyes. So we will definitely hit upon that. Our movie starts with the three protagonists, as the explanation said. We've got Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis as Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, and Egon Spengler, who are investigating the paranormal. Is kind of their thing. And they all work for the university, and they go to find a ghost at the New York Public Library. And she's a full, I forget what he keeps calling her, a full torso apparition or something like that.
Mhm.
And they're trying to essentially get evidence of the supernatural and the paranormal. And they have this first encounter at the library, which is both funny and scary, and really gives us a peek into their characters as they gather the goo off of the card catalog and stuff, which, like, my kids have no frame of reference for a card catalog.
Mhm.
The cards go flying everywhere, and the ghost ultimately attacks. What do you guys think about this whole opening intro to our friends who will become Ghostbusters?
So this is kind of a side comment, but I realize it comes up a lot in '80s movies and less so in more recent stuff, but it's still there. I realize that as someone who grew up in New York City, I take it for granted that about 1 out of every 10 movies or TV shows I watch, I'll spend a good part of it being like, "Oh, I know that spot. I was there. I was there." And, my partner who grew up in, suburban Minnesota does not really have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But so I will just say that the university is never named. It is filmed on the campus of Columbia University at a couple of spots that, me and a lot of my friends in high school knew well, having nothing to do with the fact that there was a campus club that didn't card people, that we learned about early on. But yeah, but there's a lot of nostalgia seeing that, of seeing the public library, stuff like that. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's such a cool insight. Yeah, growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, it all seems exotic to me.
Yeah.
Fair. That's fair.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing. So I there's some parts that you forget because you rewatch it, but
Mm-hmm.
I forgot. It's been a bit since I've seen it, but I mean, Ghostbusters is in my DNA. But I forgot just how much that the three characters were kind of like very much like, well, we don't want to leave the embryo of college, so we're
Yeah.
going to keep taking classes, and then we're eventually just going to stay at the university doing research projects and not have to actually get a real job.
Yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at, there's been a lot of like debate like what is like the theme of Ghostbusters, you know? Is it like, you know, because they eventually kind of become like the Ghostbusters kind of become kind of blue collar workers in a lot of ways, the way that they approach it. But these guys are like they're like sheltered academics in a lot of ways, getting one of their first like real jobs, actually leaving the college life. And so that was interesting. It's like, you know, that they've kind of just been doing their own thing, pursuing their own weird like scientific roots, or at least like with Bill Murray, treating it all kind of like a hustle or a dodge, just to kind of have an extended, like his version of the college life is different than Egon's version, you know?
Yeah, Venkman seems like he's straight out of Animal House. You know,
Yes.
I think in Animal House there's that like 7th year senior who just doesn't want to graduate, and that's straight up Venkman. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like he does have 2 PhDs. You know, but yeah, he's just there because he wants to that's his life. He's in stasis in that sense. Like he wants to party all the time.
Yeah.
You know, whereas I feel like the way that the three of them work so well, because they're all very different. Like Dan Aykroyd is a little puppy dog. He gets so excited about everything, and Egon is like super, super, you know, logical, dry, scientific. And then the way that they all bounce off of each other is really entertaining.
Speaking of ethical conundrums, when we first meet Peter, he is trying to use his position of authority to seduce a young woman by convincing her that she has psychic powers erroneously.
And I would probably say of the Bill Murray 80s characters, that would put him on the scale of like one of the least problematic characters he's portrayed.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, as the mother of young boys, if one of them had said, "Peter Venkman, he really knows how to get girls, doesn't he, Mom? Should I emulate him?"
Well, that's the thing. He was probably my favorite, but just because he would be silly.
Yeah,
you know.
I agree that he was always my favorite because he was the funny one. But my son always gravitated to Egon.
Oh,
so
nice. Okay.
Egon was his favorite. So luckily I didn't have to run into that. He's 13 now. We just watched it together, and him and my 18-year-old both agree that it's that Peter Venkman is sort of gross.
That's
although
and that's what I mean about the problematic parts, is that to me, honestly, I was kind of amazed to see the effects had actually held up pretty well. And we'll talk more about that as we get to it. The Venkman character to me is the real part that's hard to watch, because I mostly I'd remembered that he's basically a stalker to Sigourney Weaver. Until she kisses him for no legitimate reason. But then this part as well, I was just like, oh, he's just a terrible part. And
again, like on the lower scale of the characters he's played during the 80s, like in Meatballs, he's like full on like date rapist.
I mean, this is not the first time I'll say this, but there's a couple of things here that just it was just the 80s. This is just what this guy was often the romantic hero. And
well, he very much created a lot of that kind of like Caddyshack, like Meatballs in a lot of ways created some of these movies like Animal House. You know, I hope I'm not getting the timeline all messed up, but that kind of like that chaotic partier that's on our side, you know, the kind of slobs versus snobs style of comedy, like he was very much at the center of that. And it was great to see him as like a chaotic character, you know. But you can tell how much that he's probably just making up, and that's one of the things, just as an audience member, seeing Venkman fluctuate so much depending on the scene. You know, I would say that's where sometimes it's both at its best but also at its roughest.
Well, and one thing it reminded me of is that, you know, growing up for me in the 80s, a lot of times I'd see these movies with like Dana Carvey and people like that and be like, oh, okay, so this is a Saturday Night Live, you know, stars movie. and later it'd be like, Adam Sandler comes from there. Like, I think Chris Farley came from Saturday Night Live. Like a lot of those people, and then they start doing their own movies. And I forget that this is basically the same thing. Bill Murray, all that stuff you're talking about starts on Saturday Night Live in the 70s. And Dan Aykroyd, I think a lot of I forget if the third actor was part of that as well, but definitely the give and take between Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, like they were playing those two same characters of like, with Aykroyd kind of as the straight man for years in comedy. So it makes sense that it translates so well here.
Yeah, and then I think even like Winston was supposed to be originally Eddie Murphy. But for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's obvious to the Ghostbuster fans, I forget, but he didn't do it or he dropped out. He was unable to do it, but they went through with the movie anyway. Yeah, so that vibe, that energy was definitely a thing. But yeah, so like Ivan Reitman and Harold Ramis were kind of coming at one direction of like scripted comedy, and then Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray kind of coming from the SNL energy, I think Ivan Reitman, or was it Harold Ramis that did Meatballs? I know I'm bringing up on Meatballs a lot, but
yeah, I always get those confused. But I think Harold Ramis is the director and Ivan Reitman's the actor, right? But they've both
the other way around.
It's the other way around. Yep. Right. But I get them confused too. So they do get fired from the university when they get back from their first successful ghost encounter, where they actually got evidence of a specter. They're hoisted or ousted from the university, and though we don't get any backstory, it's clear that this man who is getting rid of them has hated them and wanted them gone, which is like a recurring theme for the Ghostbusters, that everybody just hates them and wants them gone. So they're sitting on the like balcony drinking out of a bottle, and he's like, I've got an idea. We're going to become Ghostbusters. It's the defense technology of the future. And we're going to take 3 mortgages on Ray's house to finance this ghost busting endeavor. So they build all this scientific equipment, and they buy the firehouse, and then they are officially Ghostbusters. But they don't get any business at first, and they're about to the well's about to run dry on them when Sigourney Weaver as Dana Barrett has her paranormal experience, where she gets home from the grocery store and all the eggs start cooking on her counter. She opens the fridge and there's a big tower in there with a devil dog saying Zool. So she goes to discuss it with the Ghostbusters, and he investigates it for her. And as you said, Matthew is basically a stalker. And he is less trying to investigate the paranormal at her house as he is trying to get a date with her. But in while they're dealing with that, they also get a nice paying job busting a ghost from a very fancy hotel. This is our Slimer ghost. And he's an ugly little spud, as Dan Aykroyd says. But they have their first successful ghost bust where they completely destroy the hotel. Like, they almost kill a maid.
Yep.
They destroy the 12th floor where the ghost is hanging out, eating snacks off of the discarded room service trays. And then they take down an entire ballroom. So, ethically speaking, they're not just destroying it through their ghost busting efforts. They're also destroying it for fun, because Peter Venkman snatches the tablecloth off of a table and says, "Oh, I've always wanted to do that. The flowers are still standing."
He manages that. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, Nathan, that you put it as, slobs for snobs. But I think that's very true here. And the hotel manager is very much that snob character.
Yeah.
In all of its 80s glory, a little bit effeminate, kind of a hoity-toity accent that might be a little French, might just be a little affected, very kind of looking down on these guys. Just at the very start, though, of the segment we're talking about here, is where I kind of feel like and again, it's the 80s and there's no internet and people aren't examining in this much detail. There are a couple of times where things happen that move the plot along as long as you just don't think about them very much. Because
Yeah.
why are they kicked out of the university? Because in the university president's eyes, all their science is junk science. They've never produced anything.
Mhm.
They have literally just proven the realism of their science by catching a ghost. And so, like, my partner and I were both like, wait, why don't they just show them the ghost? Okay, because the plot has to move along. That's fine. But
Yeah.
the timing of those two scenes, I thought was like, I have to imagine there's a draft of the script where they were flipped, and then they wanted to like balance where the action was, so they flipped them, and just didn't like. Okay, so now the plot doesn't make as much sense. It doesn't care. We'll have a fun joke coming out soon.
I think that this is the most cohesive version that there's ever been. I think, if anything, it was just reigning in anarchy.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible.
But so it's interesting. So I want to backtrack just a bit in terms of what I was saying, because I realized my point. So you had Animal House, which was first, but then you had like Meatballs and a lot of these like Caddyshack and Stripes movies, to where it's very much like this anarchist snobs versus slobs energy. And then later, mid 80s, like, you can't just have the party movies, and so you're kind of inserting some of that energy into now a kind of a formal, like a more structured story, but they still kind of have that energy in them.
Right.
And so, we wouldn't have Ghostbusters had it not been for those previous movies. But I mean, even though they are giving off that snobs versus slobs energy, it's not really about that at all, because they're academics, and they kind of touch on it as kind of like their base and kind of a part of their source of their comedy zone. But it's really, so there's a great video online by Patrick H. Willems, who says, basically the thrust of it's a video essay basically saying Ghostbusters is a perfect movie, but it's about nothing.
Right.
Which is totally fine, but I mean, basically, Ghostbusters is pure entertainment. It is the entertainment value of the scenes, of the story, of the performers, but the characters never learn a lesson. The characters never have an arc. Any kind of things that are introduced into it, like the blue collar aspect or whatever like that, has no effect on the ending. No one learns a lesson. It's basically entertainment has now concluded. Like, they won. But I mean, that's totally fine.
I think that's all very true. The only thing I'd add, though, is that I think it's important to understand that, like, in the 80s, intellectualism did not mean snob. Like, today, we often hear, like, smart is the new sexy, and like geek,
right.
Geek
it's almost like
like
common sense versus like, like that, like bureaucracy.
Exactly, yeah. Because we'll definitely see, like this fancy rich guy who runs the hotel, the environmental protection guy, who personally I think is the hero of the movie, but that's what we'll get into because of the way he's portrayed. And I think that, and again, I'm not. I do look at these things through the ethical lens, but I'm not trying to attack the movie. I think it's just from the 80s. But yeah, like all of those sort of like, antagonists, they're all kind of effeminate. They're all kind of like, they care more about, they're not guys you want to just like kick back and have a beer with and joke about the cute girls walking by, which is very much the Venkman everyman kind of idea.
Yeah, it's like who has the Budweiser, and who has the glass of wine.
And in terms of the whole, like, it doesn't have a point, I mean, I can't say that I've spent too much time watching these, but from my understanding, movies like Happy Gilmore and Little Nicky, like, the character learns a little bit of a lesson.
Right.
But it's mostly the same idea of, like, it's an excuse for 90 minutes of, repeating jokes and stuff like that. Which...
I think, if anything, like, Ghostbusters is a wonderful phenomenon, which because I think even like the dumbest movie has kind of hamstringed in some sort of like message or point or something like that by this. And I feel like the making of Ghostbusters was such a chaotic effort of rewrites and improv and bringing things in together that it's this perfect storm of everything coming together in an entertaining value. But in terms of it having like a moral or a message or some sort of meaning, which the second Ghostbusters does have, you know, is I think, you know, surprising and interesting, and doesn't affect like the entertainment value of it. But if anything, it's just kind of like an academic anomaly.
I mean, sort of, as I was watching it, part of what I was thinking about the Saturday Night Live thing is I feel thinking like, I, I remember Coneheads. I remember like a lot of bad Saturday Night Live movies. I think this might be one of the best. And maybe that's part of it, is because it is just basically a whole bunch of Saturday Night Live sketches stitched together with somewhat better effects. You know?
I think also that the story itself still is the dominating factor.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that has, I think, you know, when you've got like when I think about like the behind the scenes people, I think of like Bill Murray as a chaotic character of comedy, but also of just, you know, of improv. I think of Dan Aykroyd as kind of following whatever thing his personal bliss is. But then I think more in the Ivan Reitman, Harold Ramis writer aspect of it, that they're kind of getting the scenes about something, you know? And I think that's one of the reasons why Ghostbusters it works so well. Each scene works so well, you know, because it's still, you know, unlike some of these other like Saturday Night Live stuff, it's really all what the main character's performance is and them kind of doing these little bits, you know. It's driven by that performer, whereas this is still driven by the story.
Right. That makes sense.
So the Ghostbusters become a thing. They put commercials on TV, which is, I think, was always my son Rocket's favorite part, where they're like, "We're ready to believe you. Here's our Ghostbusters beverage coolers and free balloons for the kids."
And the inexpensive New York City TV ads market.
Yes. And the Ghostbusters, they start becoming, you know, a little bit blue collar because they're just running around busting ghosts left, right, sideways, and in between. They're tired. They're like, oh God, we have another night of class 2 free roaming vapors. Oh no. You know, they go from being really excited about it to being sort of put upon by their ghost hunting endeavors. They hire Winston, who I think it's interesting to think about Eddie Murphy in that role, because poor Winston is in this early movie, and then especially in Ghostbusters 2, is such an afterthought, almost.
Yeah, it's there's, you know, again, it's like you have to consider the making of the movie. Like Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd are such large personalities. Like, of course, he's gonna be edged out by them, you know, who always have to kind of share, like, you know, it's who always have to kind of share the spotlight at some point, you know.
And I'll say, I know that Ernie Hudson was not really happy about all that, and he later talked in his career that he thought there was kind of some racial dynamics in that. And I will say that knowing that the role was, I always thought it was kind of an unfortunately written role, knowing it was written for Eddie Murphy, who just cannot help but be the center of any screen he's on because of just, and I think Ernie Hudson is a phenomenal actor, but he's not that. He's much more subtle. He's much more understated. And so it makes a lot of sense to me of why Ernie felt like really unhappy with his role, that it was written for a very different kind of actor.
Yes.
Yeah. And in some ways, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of their roles were a little underwritten, and it's like, okay, well, these personalities are driving the performance. You know?
Yeah, and maybe just because they didn't know Ernie, that they kind of cut down some of his scenes, or just he didn't do the kind of improv like you're talking about.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, honestly, it's also possible that Because again, I haven't watched any of the behind the scenes making ofs. It's also possible that it wasn't necessarily that Eddie Murphy was playing the Winston role, that it was supposed to be, Eddie Murphy within that dynamic,
Right.
you know. I would imagine if they had Eddie Murphy that they would have introduced him sooner than the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would be either another scientist or he'd be someone who worked at the university who like hung out with them a lot,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or who knows? He could have been one of it could, instead of 3 core people, it could have been 4 core people,
Yeah.
But I do think it's, on the poster, it's just the 3 of them. There's no Winston.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's during this montage that we get what I think is the weirdest moment in the entirety of the movie Ghostbusters. It's a dream sequence in which Ray dreams that he's wearing like old fashioned like what are those called?
Epaulets?
Epaulets?
Yeah.
Epaulets, yeah.
Like
Shoulder pads,
a
basically.
shoulder pads, there you go, like a King or like Goldie Hawn and Overboard would wear.
Mhm.
And he's dressed sort of like a king, and he's laying in his bed and he imagines a beautiful ghost unzipping his pants and doing something implied, which makes his eyes roll back in his head.
Mhm. Yeah,
In
it's like a scene only for the trailer of the movie,
right. But it's there in the middle, and you're just kind of like, what is this? And
Yeah.
why is this here? That part has always been super cringy to me.
Mhm.
And I just can't sort of get over how it just throws this big wrench into the middle of the movie. And it also makes me think of like how Dan Aykroyd is seen smoking several times too.
Yeah, it's literally like just a bit or sequence, like a dream sequence in the middle of a montage.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's like, we got to put it somewhere.
Yeah.
Dan has this great idea,
Yeah, I think it's made for the trailers. I think one of the best words to describe the humor is sophomoric. And I think this is some of
Mhm.
the best sophomoric humor. I often think of that as a very negative term, but in this case I don't think it is for the most part. But yeah, this is one of the scenes that like I think to us cringing, it feels really I think at 12, I probably loved the scene.
Mhm.
But I also think, again, going to my thing about the relative social position of intelligence and geekiness, part of the joke I think is that because of course no like living woman is ever going to touch someone like Dan Aykroyd, because he's a geek,
Right.
so into ghosts and all this kind of stuff. Whereas like today you put that on a dating profile and you skyrocket. But like, yeah, so I think it's very much meant, I think, to appeal to the particular audience that this is mostly focused on. I don't think it's one of the things that aged particularly well, but this is
Right.
this is the age of Porkies, and in terms
Yes.
of gratuitous sexuality put into a movie, it's again on the lower end of what was acceptable in the 80s, which is
Yeah.
not a good thing, but it's
Right,
just
right.
more about
And honestly, who were we to judge ghosts and their needs, right? I mean,
No.
Dan Aykroyd is really just a passenger in the scene, It's
That's
this
true.
ghost that we should be blaming.
Yes, the horniness of ghosts is sadly not addressed
Mhm.
in too many movies. Thank you,
Mhm.
Ghostbusters, for bringing this important issue to the light.
You guys haven't watched a lot of modern science fiction, have you? But yeah, totally.
I think it's kind of cool and interesting that in the more recent revivals of Ghostbusters, Winston plays a huge role in reviving the Ghostbusters. Like in the Afterlife movie, he's a
Mhm.
millionaire who
Mhm.
is financing these ghost science endeavors, so they
Mhm.
sort of solve it in that way in the future.
Yeah, well, you've got to reinvent Winston a bit because he just didn't have much to do.
Yeah.
He wasn't given like a fair, like a good enough place at the table, and so I think that was a good invention, a good kind of like
Yeah.
progression for his character.
Mhm.
I mean, in some
Um,
ways, it goes back to what we were saying before because it feels kind of weird to me that you have these the two scientific characters and the one kind of frat boy character, and like, if you asked me to describe what are the differences between Egon and Ray, I don't really know. Yeah, they're pretty much the same character in a lot of ways. They've got a little
Mm.
bit of differences. Their scientific interest is a little bit different, but yeah, neither one of them is given much to do that's that distinct from the other. And I wonder if having a fourth would kind of help to round them all out a little more.
mhm. Yeah, I guess the opinion I've heard is that like Winston would have been a great opportunity to, let's say, if we had a character that had a bit of an arc to go on a journey, either they're
Right.
like as a non-believer to a believer, but he just jumps in and he's good to go. Like as long as they're paying him, he'll believe whatever they want. So even then, like this kind of outsider character doesn't have much of a change in the story.
Yeah.
So the character who does hopefully change his opinion is the guy from the EPA, the Environmental
I feel
Protection
like he is
Agency.
also unchanged by this. You know,
Oh,
oh my god,
William Atherton.
our favorite a-hole, last seen in Die Hard, or at least
Mhm.
last seen in the chronology of our podcast.
He's very good at playing the obnoxious bureaucrat.
Oh, he's so good.
is-
Like he's in the Hall of Fame. Like
Yeah.
like who beats him?
And
I don't know.
Is
William Atherton's got it on lock.
yeah.
like I said, I think by the time of this movie, by the time I'm watching it now, I am deeply sympathetic to his character.
Yes.
And I think that it's, and again, I don't want to bring too much politics into it, but this is the middle of the Reagan era. And
Mhm.
so, the real guys are the slobs are the heroes, and who are the villains? They're more effeminate, they're more bureaucratic, they're much more like government should regulate everything. Like, I think he's very much a stereotype, bad guy of the age. And obviously his decision to say, let's just release all the ghosts is ridiculous and terrible. But the idea that this massive amount of supernatural activity is happening, and
Right.
these three guys are doing it carrying some kind of atomic devices on their back, which is never really specified, with no
Uh-huh.
licensing, no regulation whatsoever. I'm a big government guy, I guess, because I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Well,
no, I want some inspections here,
I
please.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. I 100% see the need for the EPA to investigate. But I think with this particular character, he takes any kind of opposition so personally
Yeah,
that he then becomes a problem. Like he is the one who, like if that would have caused an actual explosion and people would have died, it wouldn't have been the Ghostbusters' fault. It would have been him. Like
yeah,
even you've got like the worker saying, "I don't know what this is. I shouldn't shut it down." That
right.
would have been the case to de-escalate and
Yeah,
discuss it, but instead he's taken it personal and he'll just take it to the nth level.
yeah.
Well, Bill Murray is a jerk to him from the moment he
Mhm.
steps in the door. Like he
Mhm.
never even has an opportunity to be reasonable because he's immediately
Well,
antagonistic.
I feel like Bill Murray like senses his dickishness and then reacts with double time
Mhm.
reversal. You know?
He just has a radar for
Yeah,
people
no,
who are assholes.
absolutely. And I've been like that before. Like if someone is being rude, I might, like instead of like, like teasing back at them instead of
Mhm.
de-escalating. I felt like it was interesting, like when Bill Murray did show up late to the whole like let's turn off the thing, he was bringing it back down because there were also other people to talk to, including
Yeah.
his friends. Like he was like, all right, let's chill, let's de-escalate, and Atherton was not having it.
Yep.
Mhm.
So in the meantime,
Can I just say one thing about that segment?
yes, please.
I know the 80s was the era of the montage, but I
Yes.
think this has to be in the top 10 of 80s montages. Like,
Yeah,
in part because the song is so good, but also they do that just classic, like, you see the action, then you see the newspaper headline, all of which are real New York papers, and the tone of them all fit like what the paper should be. But just it was just such a wonderful way of like telling me everything about where the plot is going in that
Mhm.
exact time period. And the song is just such a banger that I love it.
yeah, agreed.
All of the songs are bangers. It's a great soundtrack. Buster makes me feel good. Do. It's all great.
You say that, I'm sure
Um,
you're right. I can't think of a single other song that was on the soundtrack.
Yeah,
those the boys are cleaning up the town song.
Oh
yeah.
The
yeah, yep, that's right.
Ghostbusters are cleaning up the town. All
Yep.
right. Um, so while the EPA is releasing all the ghosts, Dana Barrett and her down the hall, I not roommate. What's the word? Neighbor.
Neighbor.
Why couldn't I think of the word neighbor? Both become possessed by demon dog ghost
Things, yeah.
things. Dana becomes the gatekeeper. Rick Moranis becomes the key master. And while Rick Moranis is running around the town trying to harass the horses on the street, Dana Barrett is supposed to be going on a date with Bill Murray.
Mm-hmm.
So we get some cool movie moments where she's like floating around and twisting and turning in the air. It's a pretty neat practical effect. But basically, we've determined that while the Ghostbusters are arrested, they determine that Dana Barrett's apartment is like built out of a special kind of metal that is like an antenna for ghostly activities, and that it's channeling Gozer the Gozerian, who will bring about the destructor, the traveler,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all going to happen on the roof of Dana Barrett's apartment building, where she and Rick Moranis have been turned into dog statues.
Yeah. Couple of quick New York notes. That is a real building. A friend of mine lived there and told great stories about riding in the elevator sometimes, and like whole film crews were going up to the up to there to film all that.
Cool.
And Rick Moranis was very much a New York character. Like he went to the same pizza place I did a lot. We always saw him a lot, and I think this is his first major feature film. And interestingly enough, I hadn't even thought about this, but with what you were saying, what both of you were saying, maybe check into it. He's not a Saturday Night Live guy, but he is Second City, which is kind of a
Mhm.
Chicago. I don't think they've ever really
Mhm.
been on television the same way, but it's that same kind of like skit and sketch comedy. So it
Yeah,
makes sense that he fits into this really well too.
yeah. There's strong Chicago vibes in this New York movie, and I think it's
Mhm.
because I think Bill Murray is also from Chicago? Question mark.
I think with him and
Um,
Dan, I mean, because I know they do Blues Brothers, which is a very Chicago focused movie.
yeah, Bill Murray's not
Oh
in
no, that's
Blues
Belushi
Brothers.
and
Yeah,
Aykroyd. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah. There's a strong Chicago vibe in here.
Hmm.
But yeah, man, can you and then the role of that Rick Moranis plays was originally supposed to be John Candy, which would have
Interesting.
Oh.
been very different.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it would have done a great job. But yeah, Rick Moranis just kills it. Like
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's fantastic. He steals every scene he's in.
he
And
sure does.
there's some parts in the movie that are very intentionally over the top, but there are so many gags that are subtle. Where like he keeps locking himself out of the apartment, but they never like hang a lampshade on it. He never
Mhm.
gets
Mhm.
like, why do you always do that? Like it's just a thing that you could miss, but it's just a constant for his character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like he steals scenes away from Bill Murray.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
so good.
So they end up fighting Gozer the Gozerian. They can't defeat her, and she's like, "Choose the form of the Destructor." And they're like, "Nope, we're all gonna make our minds blank except poor Ray, who
Mhm.
imagines the Stay Puff Marshmallow Man, who then comes forward to attack the whole city. He's the size of Godzilla, and he
Mhm.
comes marching up the New York City streets. They determine that the only way to stop this dimensional portal is to cross the streams of their proton packs, which eventually, essentially, is the magic button that pops everyone back to their own dimension, explodes the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man all over everybody, and saves the day. They get to break Dana Barrett and Rick Moranis out of their dog exoskeletons. They're saved. Everyone is saved. Bill Murray surprisingly has very little marshmallow fluff on him.
Mhm.
And the Ghostbusters are heroes to the city. And that is the Ghostbusters.
Oh
What
my
do you guys
gosh.
think of the end?
Yeah, I again, like the ending and the decisions that they make really have nothing to do with the characters. It's
Mhm.
really kind of like the thing we can't do with the proton packs. Oh, and then now we're going to risk our lives to do it. But it's just great entertainment. Like
Yeah.
it's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I enjoy the analysis. I have a couple of points to make, but I'll first just say I enjoy the analysis that we're making of this, but I kind of miss when we didn't do this all the time. Like, I think
Hmm.
movies today are a lot more tightly made, in part because they know this is what they're going to be subjected to all the time. You didn't do that in the 80s. Like, you watched the movie, you ate your popcorn, you enjoyed it. So some people wrote reviews in television or newspapers, and everyone went along their day because you weren't going to see it again for 6 months when it came out on Betamax or VHS. Um, just a couple things I'll throw in though. Just so we know that like the belt scene wasn't on its own, the opening of Dan Aykroyd's belt by the ghost. You know, again with some of the humor, the Sigourney Weaver character who has been denying Bill Murray romantic access for most of the movie becomes the gatekeeper, who was opened by the keymaster.
Yep.
So I thought the imagery of those things was particularly on the nose.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it's a really fun movie. It's the kind of thing where I think when you stop and like if I were to explain this to someone, I think they would think this sounds absolutely awful. But the characters are so into it, the humor is so fast rolling, the gags are coming so quick that I think it just carries you so well.
I
Hmm.
agree. I agree. So rating this movie is going to be a tough one.
Can I just say one other
Yeah.
quick thing before we do that?
Yes, please do.
Just I will also say in terms of the like problematic sleaziness of the movie, there's a time when Sigourney Weaver's character is now possessed by Gozer and clearly has a much more amorous attitude and is like, you want to take
Yes.
me, don't
Uh-huh.
you? And in other movies of this time, the Bill Murray character would happily sleep with her under those
Yeah,
conditions.
you'd cut to him being ravaged and being thrown off screen, and him waking up with his clothes torn apart, and now needing to
Exactly.
get the story back on track. But yeah, he it's like, and I don't feel like we've talked enough about just how great Sigourney Weaver is in this movie.
She
Like
really
when
is.
he is going like full on trying to woo her, she is rock hard not having it. She
Yeah.
is, you're like a game show host. Like,
Hmm.
Such a good
I
line.
am not into you at all. And she is one of the anchors of like the of normal people that this movie needs.
Hmm.
She's fantastic in this.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Like he is backtracking. Okay,
Yep.
I'm not as sleazy as you thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, I was like, okay, it's clearly a non-consensual moment for her, so I'm glad that they
Hmm.
can acknowledge that. And yeah, I just think her acting in it is phenomenal. She's and funny too, because I think the only thing she'd really done before this was Alien. So
Yeah,
a really
she did
different
some
kind of role.
smaller films, but in terms of like big like cultural movies, like
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, she did great.
Yeah.
Agree. Totally. Always love Sigourney Weaver. She's a treat and a delight whenever you get a little slice of Sigourney.
Mhm.
So on a scale of 1 PKE ping,
Mhm.
On free floating torso apparitions.
yes, to 10 free floating torso apparitions, how many free floating torso apparitions do we give the Ghostbusters? And I'm truly intrigued. I don't know what I'm going to say yet. What do
Yeah,
you think, Nathan?
I would. Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, this is a perfect movie, but
Mm-hmm.
it also like it's kind of a rough. It's like the roughest perfect movie.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like I could watch Die Hard or Princess Bride and literally see like no flaws, and this has tons of flaws, but it's so damn charming. You
Yes, it
know,
is.
I'm probably landing somewhere in the 9 out of 10 zone. Maybe when I was younger, I would have given it like a 9.5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think a 9, which is still like top tier,
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
want to downgrade. I don't want to dismiss it just because it's a little rough.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah. What about you guys?
What do you think, Matthew?
So I think you're right in it being kind of like the almost perfect in terms of like the 80s mindless comedy. I think this is the perfect 80s mindless comedy.
Mm.
It just
Mm-hmm.
like that's not really what I want. There's very rare times where I want a mindless movie.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's kind of like saying it's the perfect hot dog. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you're at a ball game, you want a hot dog, and the best hot dog in the world is great, but it's still never going to be like the kind of food you can get somewhere else. So to me, I think I put it at 6.5. Like it's
Oh.
Okay.
very good for what it is. And maybe I've just come on an 80s podcast and kind of, degraded all 80s, and that's not what I'm saying at all. Because I do think it's a great movie, and I'm glad that it spawned so many others, and I'm gonna keep watching it again and again, even though some parts of it are really cringeworthy.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I think I put it like 6.5.
Excellent. I love it. I'm gonna go way higher than 6.5. I'm gonna go closer to Nathan, I think. And just because like when I think about rating these movies, I always think about, if we ask ourselves how do they hold up these days, the question is, do they still entertain the all ages of today? And Ghostbusters is a yes, because my kids, as soon as they saw that I was watching it, were like, "Oh yeah, I'm down for Ghostbusters." And as soon as Ghostbusters 1 was done, we queued up Ghostbusters 2, and they were ready to spend the whole evening watching Ghostbusters. So I will give it the 9.5.
Nice.
I'll still take away a few points for those cringy moments that you just can't get away from, and the things that don't hold up. But I'll give it a strong 9.5.
I mean, in terms of
Nice.
holding up, the effects completely hold up, which I was surprised by for a not huge budget early 80s movie.
Yeah, especially the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man stuff. Like
Oh my
that's so
god,
good.
yes. My daughter was like, "This CGI is so bad," and I was like, "That's not CGI; those are real practical effects." And she was
Yep.
like, "Oh wow."
That face
Yeah,
he makes when he's angry is just so scary. Like,
so scary. And I love in the new movie, the little tiny Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans. They're like little. There's like a million of them, and they're little tiny, and they're, oh my god, they're so cute,
nice.
and they're so destructive and hilarious, and I love them.
The last one I saw was the Chris Hemsworth, the Kate McKinnon, and Chris Hemsworth and not Felicity Jones, but
Melissa McCarthy.
Melissa McCarthy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that one. I've not seen Afterlife yet though, but I want to because hopefully I'm going to get you two on my podcast when the newest one comes out, which is happening very soon.
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, today.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Okay.
Okay.
Before we sign off, we should talk about the difficulty of making a Ghostbusters sequel.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where it's like the original movie is so beloved, but yet the ability to come up with a sequel that works for people is really, really tough. And why do you think that is?
I think there was some unfairness towards the Lady Ghostbuster movie, and that people were like unfairly sort of punishing it for being a, girl power, blah blah blah. I thought it was very funny,
Yeah, I loved
and
it.
I thought it was very good. So I didn't think that was quite fair. And then to just like leave it in the dust. I'm glad that they have this sort of, quote unquote reboot, if you will, with Afterlife and Frozen Empire, because of course I want more Ghostbusters. I want Ghostbusters for a new generation, and I like the way that they made the story happen, and I like the new movies. So yeah, I'm kind of for it in that way, which is interesting because then I will see or hear of other 80s movies getting rebooted or remade, like Roadhouse. And I'm like, how dare you?
Right?
Stay away.
Stay away from my Roadhouse.
There's
Yes.
so much 80s
Yeah.
reboots coming out this year. Either reboots or sequels.
Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I loved the Kate McKinnon, Melissa McCarthy, all of them version, and I was disappointed to hear that that because I think the Afterlife one, they're not the same canon, right? The idea is that that's its own
No,
thing.
yeah, so it's the female Ghostbuster one is like its own
Yeah.
what if.
Because I'm definitely
And-
disappointed that that's not gotten more stuff, but internet being what it is, and I understand the trolls really attacked it. I think, as you said, very unfairly. I think though it's also hard because, and again, I was 7. I can't say like I was dedicated to understanding film at that age. But my understanding is, especially when I remember adults talking about it, is this was one of the first times that you really had like ghosts and spooky things. Like, I mean, there'd been like all the 60s and 70s horror movies, but this level of effects and this level of also making it comedic, I think was fairly new. Whereas today, when you can see ghosts with far better effects on every Doctor Who episode, let alone like half the movies and TV shows that are out there, you really have to come up with something new and different. So yeah, I think that there are many parts of the original Ghostbusters format that the kind of like bro, making comments and jokes and stuff like that doesn't age at all. I think it's very much a movie of its time in a lot of ways, and I think that's probably why. And I'm glad that people are trying to translate it. And I've heard Afterlife is good, and I want to see it. But I imagine that any kind of resuscitation of it today requires a lot of cultural translation.
It's tough because I feel like a lot of reasons that the first Ghostbusters works so well is because of the 3 main leads and them kind of capturing a bit of lightning in a bottle, you know, and even bringing back the same team with Ghostbusters 2 for a lot of people was not very successful, like where Ghostbusters, like I haven't revisited Ghostbusters 2 in so long, but I remember, I'm sure that now that that I can kind of approach it with more of a, how like some people like the Temple of Doom more than Raiders Lost Ark because of the cheese factor. I remember like Ghostbusters 2 was the first movie to me as a young kid that introduced the idea that something that I'm excited for could be bad.
Oh no.
Yeah, like coming out of the theater and just saying to myself, wait, I think that was bad. As a kid, like Ghostbusters 2 was that moment in my brain development. I think that
I'm
was
so
bad.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you had that experience.
I remember having that experience, but actually it was a kind of good thing in my world because this was when VHS machines and Betamaxes and stuff like that were still fairly new. My family happened to have one, and we had Ghostbusters. And so when I went with a couple of my friends to go see it, and we were all disappointed, I said, "Hey, you want to come back to my house and watch the original Ghostbusters?" And they were like, "Yeah, this is great." So I don't think I ever even saw the third because I was so disappointed by the second one.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
so
I'm a huge Ghostbusters 2 apologist. I love Vigo the Carpathian.
okay,
uh-huh.
I think I am on that. I queued it up last night after I watched Ghostbusters 1. I then realized that it was 1 o'clock in the morning and I had someone coming over at 9 to look at the house. So I decided sleep was the better part of valor, but I will probably watch
Yes.
Ghostbusters 2
Mhm.
over the weekend at some point.
So responsible of you. So what about a deep cut recommendation? Again, it's
Oof.
hard with a movie like Ghostbusters because there's so many uh, uh
Mhm.
like surface level recommendations. So I can't wait to
Mhm.
hear what you
There's a
got
lot of
for me.
not deep cut
Yeah.
recommendations, you
Yes,
know?
that's what I
Like
meant.
like
Not deep cut.
the easiest one to recommend outside of Ghostbusters 2, you know, like the one to pair up for like a double feature is The Frighteners.
I
Like
love the
that
Frighteners.
yeah, like I mean it deals with ghosts, it deals with paranoia, I mean um not
Paranormal.
paranoia, paranormal, and but it kind of takes it into what if like the dark, crazy Peter Jackson version of it, you know,
Hmm.
to
Right.
where only he sees ghosts and can interact with them, but then it becomes it's more of a horror film and more of a cartoon film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I,
but it's
I think I'd go
tough.
in a I think I'd go in a different direction with my deep cut, which is that which is the only connection this movie has is Bill Murray, but it has very much the chaotic, all over the place Bill Murray story, and it's I think probably my favorite Christmas movie, which is Scrooged.
Scrooged.
Scrooged is a phenomenal retelling of the classic Christmas Carol story, where Bill Murray is Frank Cross, who is a network president, who is visited by the ghost of Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future, and it's very New York. Christmas past is a 1950s Brooklyn cab driver, and it
Hmm.
is Bill Murray at just his absolute most chaotic and wonderful, and I absolutely love it. So that would probably be my deep cut.
I love
Cool.
that. I want to recommend a TV show. It is a remake or reboot, if you will, of a British TV show on CBS called Ghosts, where a lady in an old antique house can see the little army of ghosts that all live in this house with her and her husband, and they're trying to open a B&B and start a little business there, and it's very funny. The ghosts are all incredibly charming and likable, and I think it's a hilarious show, so I want to recommend Ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch it. You can watch both the British version and the newer American CBS version on Paramount Plus, which is how I watch it. And I think it's a really great show.
Nice, nice.
Great.
So, Matthew, True Story FM is where people can go to hear all of your wonderful podcasts.
Yep. Yeah, superhero ethics and Star Wars Generations.
Excellent. And squishystudios.com is where everyone can go to see all of your short films and find links to all of your magical filmmaking endeavors.
It's
Nathan
true.
Blackwell?
It's true. It's the easiest way.
Well, short movies and your feature length film, is that also there?
So we do have a link. There's like a link to the trailer.
Uh-huh.
Probably in about a month or so, we'll have information on when it's going to be released, so people on the internet can rent it or buy it.
Awesome. Yeah, it
Mhm.
was a
Um,
lot. I got to see an early version of it, and it was a really fun concept and
oh,
really
thank
good. I
you.
really hope you check it out.
Cool. So yeah, the last movie ever made. Right now, um, uh, probably still the best way is to just go to Squishy Studios and it'll point you in the right direction.
Excellent. Love the last movie ever made. And you can find me and my other podcast, Gank That Drank, a supernatural drinking game podcast, also at True Story FM. If you're at True Story FM, do think of becoming a member. You get every episode a week early, and you get access to the special bonus content. You also get access to the True Story FM Discord channel where you can discuss discuss all things movies and all things 80s movies with us. You can talk to us. Isn't that cool? Become a member. We love you so much. And while you're out there in the world, please keep the 80s movies, the most excellent 80s movies podcast motto in mind. Be excellent to each other and party
Party
on,
on,
dudes.
dudes.
Stay classy, Manhattan.